O God, my God, I beg of thee by the ocean of thy healing, and by the splendours of the day star of thy grace, and by thy name through which thou didst subdue thy servants, powerful art thou to do what pleaseth thee. There is none other God save thee, the ever forgiving, the most generous.
Welcome. Usually I do a quick recap of previous study sessions, so I'm going to try and rifle through some of these salient points. We're going to start off with this Beit Azam, this most great house that Baha'u'llah was staying in. One of the government officials, Suja Dole, he decided that he wanted to make a duplicate of this house in Kazimane. So this government official loved the house of Baha'u'llah so much, he wanted to replicate the house in Kazimane, even though the house was a dilapidated house and just had one sofa in it. So there was nothing so special about the house, apart from the fact that His Holiness Baha'u'llah was in fact there. Again, known as the Beit Azam, the most great house. Another prince by the name of Zainul Abidin Khan, he also said that even if he had all the sorrows of the world crammed into his heart, the fact that he could be in that room with Baha'u'llah would just make everything go away. Nothing would affect him. These two testimonies from people who absolutely were falling in love with His Holiness Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah, of course, who has now come back from his 2-year stay in Kurdistan, Soleimani area. People were absolutely filled with joy at this point. The Babis, the conditions had started to rise, things were changing. People were very much in love with the goings on and what was happening. However, the ulama, the clergy, were not so happy about this at all. We hear many stories that the Guardian refers to that it could go into the love that people had for Baha'u'llah. We said it was absolutely so many things that were going on. But one story that really stands out is the story of Sayyid Ismail Zavareh. Now, this is someone who's known as Zabeh, which means sacrifice, actually, this title. And he would follow Baha'u'llah, and anytime he came near the approach of Baha'u'llah's house, he would pick up the dust that Baha'u'llah had walked on, and even the dust in the nooks and crannies of the wall, would collect them in his robe. He'd take his turban off, and he'd take this dust, and he would throw them away, so that nobody else would stand on that dust that had been blessed with Baha'u'llah. Such was his love. He eventually spends 40 days praying and not really sleeping or drinking much, in which he's so in love and enraptured with Baha'u'llah. We know Baha'u'llah has parted his fingers and showed him the next world after he begged Baha'u'llah repeatedly. Eventually, he takes his own life. Along the banks of the river, on the way to Kazimane, he lies on his back and slits his throat. There were many others who wanted to do this, but Baha'u'llah stopped them and said, look, this isn't the course of action that I require you to take. It was cleared up that Zabeh had no foul play with regards to him, that this was something he did himself. A lot of the government officials were moved by his love. Baha'u'llah goes on to say that no bloodshed was as pure as his. He also extols Zabeh to the king and beloved of martyrs. Nabil himself says that he witnesses many of these things. The author of the Dawnbreakers, said, I witnessed a lot of these happenings. It was absolutely amazing. He said the Babis would see a palace of a king and they would see that as nothing compared to a spider's web, basically. They said it was more ephemeral than a spider's web, so that could just disappear quicker than a spider's web. They were not attached to goods or anything. People celebrated, and they were so in love, more celebrations than kings would have, Nabil would say, of the coming of this great rise again of the Babi community. We know that Baha'u'llah, in a tablet, he explains that at one point he had no bed linen that he could change, and he'd only have one shirt which he would take off every night and would wash it. So the conditions were poor in a sense of material possessions, but in terms of spiritual wealth, they were sky high. People poured in, they were really in love with Baha'u'llah. We know that some of the Babis, maybe 10 of them, would eat a penny's worth of dates. That's how they would sustain themselves. They would share shoes. Some of them even apparently forgotten their names. They were so in love with Baha'u'llah, as was said. After the Soleimani period, Baha'u'llah had written copious amounts of writings, which he describes as copious rain. He had written epistles, exhortations, commentaries, dissertations, prophecies, prayers, odes, specific tablets, which actually helped reform the Babi community. So many were the verses that streamed from the pen of Baha'u'llah. We know this 2-year period after Soleimani, the amount of verses that were recorded, even the unrecorded verses, apparently average verses that would equal the Quran in the space of a day and a night. So absolutely, the rapidity was crazy, and they were on the most diverse subjects as well. And Baha'u'llah's amanuensis states that he had hundreds of thousands of verses that he was asked to throw away into the river. And he didn't want to do this, but Baha'u'llah said, look, no one is worthy to hear these verses. So countless of these verses were thrown into the river. There was someone by the name of Muhammad Karim from Shiraz, and he had witnessed His Holiness the Bab and his revelation, and he'd also witnessed Baha'u'llah and his revealing of words and the rest of it. And he says that Baha'u'llah was more intense than the Bab. And we know the Bab was so intense in the way in which he'd reveal verses, but apparently, according to Muhammad Karim, it was more intense even with Baha'u'llah. The Igan was then written in 2 days and nights, and this was written on the eve of his declaration, and it was about 200 pages long. If you imagine that, 2 days and 2 nights, 200 pages. This was written in response to the Bab's uncle, Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, who at the time was not a converted believer of the Bab. It was also prophesied by the Bab that him whom God shall make manifest will come and finish this. This was a continuation of none other than the Ketaba Bayan, which we know in the last Vahed there was only 10 chapters instead of 19 chapters. So this was a continuation. In that, Baha'u'llah talks about a number of themes. He talks about one God, an unknowable essence, the source of all revelation, relative religious truth, the unity of prophets, a universality of the message, the sanctity of scripture. He denounces the perverse divines that exist and doctors. He explains that certain verses from the New Testament and abstruse passages of the Quran, goes into some of the hadiths, talks about the sublimity and significance of the Bab's own revelation. He talks about the innocence of Virgin Mary and the sovereignty of the Imams of Islam, touches upon such subjects as the Day of Judgment, the return, the resurrection, the seal of the prophets. So absolutely jam-packed with so much in there. And this book is, from what I understand, second only to the Aqdas in terms of its position that it holds in Baha'u'llah's writings. We also know many other books were written, such as The Hidden Words and Gems of Divine Mystery, The Seven Valleys, which was written in response to someone by the name of Sheikh Muhyiddin, who wasn't the original Sheikh Muhyiddin, of course. That was many years earlier, this person who's also known as Ibn Arab, but someone, one of his followers, basically. Now, a lot of them apparently would call themselves after him, and they would call themselves also Sheikh Muhyiddin. We know that the Four Valleys was written, the Tablet of the Holy Mariners, the Tablet of the Maiden, the Surah of Patience, in which he extols Wahid. So many things were written, so many odes, so many homilies, so many tablets, commentaries, prayers. It was a period jam-packed with information, with writings that had just streamed from Baha'u'llah. This was all brilliant, it was amazing, people were falling in love. However, of course, the clergy, the ulama, were not happy by this, and they were angry, they were slightly upset. By this point, Baha'u'llah had now moved his residence, and he was living in the strongholds of Shia Islam. He was surrounded by many fanatical pilgrims that would come to both Karbala and Najaf to see the shrines of Imam Hussein and Imam Ali, and also Qazimain, the 7th and 9th Imams. So a lot of them would come, and a portion of these were very fanatical, and there was some friction that was being developed, and they were basically being pushed mainly by somebody called Sheikh Abdul Hussein. Now, he was very jealous, and this is a man that Baha'u'llah actually refers to as a scoundrel, a schemer, a wicked one, in whose soul Satan whispered. So Baha'u'llah was quite a lot to say about this guy. Now, as it turns out, Sheikh Abdul Hussein had been sent to Karbala by Muhammad Shah. He was in Tehran, but Muhammad Shah sent him from Tehran to Karbala. A lot of this actually was pushed by Haji Mirza Aghassi, the prime minister at the time, who couldn't stand him and didn't want him there at all. And he was going to go to Karbala and Najaf, and he was meant to be in charge of completely restoring a lot of the holy sites. That's what he was charged to do. That's why he was there. When he gets there, he wants to cause a lot of problems, and he does this. One of the things he does is he asks the Mufti, Mustafa Pasha, to extradite Baha'u'llah back to Iran. He wants to get rid of Baha'u'llah. This obviously fails. He then joins up with the Persian Consul General, somebody by the name of Mirza Bazar Khan, and he says, look, let's work together to get rid of Baha'u'llah, because this guy was also very jealous of Baha'u'llah. The second thing they tried to do is they tried to make up dreams of things that they'd seen, saying, oh, look, this has happened, that's happened, we should get rid of Baha'u'llah. People were not interested. The third thing was when Mirza Bazar Khan tried to get some of the poorer people in the town to provoke Baha'u'llah and cause some sort of response that Baha'u'llah would flip out, and they would say, look, see what Baha'u'llah's done? However, what would Baha'u'llah do? He would go up to them, he would talk about what they're trying to do, and then would make a joke, and then they would laugh, and they would go home. So this attempt as well completely and utterly fell on deaf ears. It's then that Mirza Bazar Khan decides to get a Turkish ruffian, somebody by the name of Reza, pays him 100 tomans, and says to him, here's a gun, go and assassinate Baha'u'llah. And I promise you, you will be looked after, you will have no troubles. So he goes along to the public bath. While he's there, sees Baha'u'llah, wants to shoot him, but doesn't have the courage to do so. The second time that he tries to make an attempt on the life of Baha'u'llah that he himself talks about, he says that he was waiting in the street with his pistol. Baha'u'llah comes around the corner with his brother, Mirza Musa Agha Khadim, and he wants to pull out his pistol, But Baha'u'llah looks at him and he just trembles and trembles, drops his pistol, at which Baha'u'llah approaches him, smiles, and then asks Mirza Musa to pass his gun back to him, and then sends him on the way home. So none of these things seem to be working. After all these frustrations that they had in trying to get rid of Baha'u'llah, this is where Sheikh Abdul Hussein speaks to Mirza Bazar Khan and promises him a promotion. He says, you will get a promotion to become an even bigger minister. I promise I will do this if you can succeed in getting Baha'u'llah sent back to Tehran and then put in prison. So lies then circulate. Mirza Bazar Khan then keeps writing to Shah to try and get support and accusing Baha'u'llah of doing X, Y, and Z. Eventually, a mandate is given to him. He has now mandate, so he can do what he wants and has the support of the Persian ulamas. And they say, look, they will lend you every service. So he wants to do something to get rid of Baha'u'llah. He then calls all the ulamas of Najaf and Karbala, the important ones, to a place called Kazimain, where he was. And he says, look, come here. And the purpose of this was to try and get Baha'u'llah killed. And he was trying to say, let's start a jihad, a holy war against Baha'u'llah and the Babis and go and execute them. And one person who was invited to this was a leading mujtahid, Sheikh Murtada Ansari. And when he heard of the purpose, he was furious. He got up and said, absolutely not. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. He then even writes to Baha'u'llah and apologizes and says, had I have known this was their purpose, I wouldn't have even attended. Failing at this, the rest of the ulama, the clergy, they're thinking, what can we do? So they have someone, a delegate by the name of Haji Mullah Hassan Amur, to go and ask questions of Baha'u'llah. Write to Baha'u'llah, ask some questions. Baha'u'llah says, look, it's not for you to test me, but fine. Baha'u'llah responds to the questions. He shows the rest of the clergy and they just sort of say, well, okay, tell him that we accept that he has a bit of knowledge, but we have a challenge. If he can produce a miracle, we will believe in him. 100% we will believe in him. Baha'u'llah says, okay, interesting. Decide on a miracle, and then I will do it. Of course, they go back and they can't decide on a miracle because if Baha'u'llah is able to perform this, they will have to accept. That, ladies and gentlemen, brings us up to date with where we were.
7 years of uninterrupted, of patient and eminently successful consolidation were now drawing to a close. A shepherdless community, subjected to a prolonged and tremendous strain from both within and without, and threatened with obliteration, had been resuscitated and risen to an ascendancy without example in the course of its 20 years' history. Its foundations reinforced, its spirit exalted, its outlook transformed, its leadership safeguarded, its fundamentals restated, its prestige enhanced, its enemies discomfited, the hand of destiny was gradually preparing to launch it on a new phase in its checkered career, in which weal and woe alike were to carry it through yet another stage in its evolution. The deliverer, the sole hope, and the virtually recognized leader of this community, who had consistently overawed the authors of so many plots to assassinate him, who had scornfully rejected all the timid advice that he should flee from the scene of danger, who had firmly declined repeated and generous offers made by friends and supporters to ensure his personal safety, who had won so conspicuous a victory over his antagonists. He was, at this auspicious hour, being impelled by the resistless processes of his unfolding mission to transfer his residence to the centre of still greater preeminence, the capital city of the Ottoman Empire, the seat of the Caliphate, the administrative centre of Sunni Islam, the abode of the most powerful potentate in the Islamic world. He had already flung a daring challenge to the sacerdotal order represented by the eminent ecclesiastics residing in Najaf, Karbala, and Kazimain. He was now, while in the vicinity of the court of his royal adversary, to offer a similar challenge to the recognized head of Sunni Islam, as well as to the sovereign of Persia, the trustee of the hidden Imam. The entire company of the kings of the earth, and in particular the Sultan and his ministers, were, moreover, to be addressed by him, appealed to and warned, while the kings of Christendom and the Sunni hierarchy were to be severely admonished. Little wonder that the exiled bearer of a newly announced revelation should have, in anticipation of the future splendour of the lamp of his faith, after its removal from Iraq, uttered these prophetic words. It will shine resplendently within another globe, as predestined by him who is the omnipotent, the Ancient of Days. That the spirit should depart out of the body of Iraq is indeed a wondrous sign unto all who are in heaven and all who are on earth. Ere long will ye behold this divine youth riding upon the steed of victory. Then will the hearts of the envious be seized with trembling. The predestined hour of Baha'u'llah's departure from Iraq having now struck, the process whereby it could be accomplished was set in motion. The 9 months of unremitting endeavour exerted by his enemies, and particularly by Sheikh Abdul Hussein and his confederate Mirza Buzurg Khan, were about to yield their fruit. Nasruddin Shah and his ministers, on the other hand, and the Persian ambassador in Constantinople, on the other, were incessantly urged to take immediate action to ensure Baha'u'llah's removal from Baghdad. Through gross misrepresentation of the true station and the dissemination of alarming reports, a malignant and energetic enemy finally succeeded in persuading the Shah to instruct his foreign minister, Mirza Said Khan, to direct the Persian ambassador at the Sublime Porte, Mirza Hussein Khan, a close friend of Ali Pasha, the Grand Vizier of the Sultan, and of Fuad Pasha, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to enjoin Sultan Abdul Aziz to order the immediate transfer of Baha'u'llah to a place remote from Baghdad, on the ground that his continued residence in that city, adjacent to the Persian territory, and close to so important a centre of Shia pilgrimage, constituted a direct menace to the security of Persia and its government. Mirza Said Khan, in his communication to the ambassador, stigmatized the faith as a misguided and detestable sect, deplored Baha'u'llah's release from the Siyat-Shal, and denounced him as one who did not cease from secretly corrupting and misleading foolish persons and ignorant weaklings. In accordance with the royal command, he wrote, I, your faithful friend, have been ordered to instruct you to seek, without delay, an appointment within their excellencies, the Sadr-e-Azam and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to request the removal of this source of mischief from a centre like Baghdad, which is the meeting place of many different peoples and is situated near the frontiers of the provinces of Persia. In that same letter, quoting a celebrated verse, he writes, I see beneath the ashes the glow of fire, and it wants but little to burst into a blaze, thus betraying his fears and seeking to instill them in his correspondent. Encouraged by the presence on the throne of a monarch who had delegated much of his powers to his ministers, and aided by certain foreign ambassadors and ministers in Constantinople, Mirza Hussein Khan, by dint of much persuasion and the friendly pressure he brought to bear on these ministers, succeeded in securing the sanction of the Sultan for the transfer of Baha'u'llah and his companions, who had in the meantime been forced by circumstances to change their citizenship to Constantinople. It is even reported that the first request the Persian authorities made of a friendly power, after the accession of the new Sultan to the throne, was for its active and prompt intervention in this matter. It was on the 5th of Nowruz, 1863, while Baha'u'llah was celebrating the festival in the Mazra-e Vashash in the outskirts of Baghdad, and had just revealed the tablet of the Holy Mariner, whose gloomy prognostications had aroused the grave apprehensions of his companions, that an emissary of Nimak Pasha arrived and delivered into his hands a communication requesting an interview between him and the governor. Already, as Nabil has pointed out in his narrative, Baha'u'llah had, in the course of his discourses, during the last years of his sojourn in Baghdad, alluded to the period of trial and turmoil that was inexorably approaching, exhibiting a sadness and heaviness of heart which greatly perturbed those around him. A dream which he had at the time, the ominous character of which could not be mistaken, served to confirm the fears and misgivings that had assailed his companions. I saw, he wrote in a tablet, the prophets and the messengers gather and seat themselves around me, moaning, weeping, and loudly lamenting. Amazed, I inquired of them the reason, whereupon their lamentation and weeping waxed greater. And they said unto me, We weep for thee, O most great mystery, O tabernacle of immortality. They wept with such a weeping that I too wept with them. Thereupon the concourse on high addressed me, saying, Ere long shalt thou behold within thine own eyes what no prophet hath beheld. Be patient, be patient. They continued addressing me the whole night, until the approach of dawn. Oceans of sorrow, Nabil affirms, surged in the hearts of the listeners when the tablet of the Holy Mariner was read aloud to them. It was evident to every one that the chapter of Baghdad was about to be closed, and a new one opened in its stead. No sooner had that tablet been chanted than Baha'u'llah ordered that the tents which had been pitched should be folded up, and that all his companions should return to the city. While the tents were being removed, he observed, These tents may be likened to the trappings of this world, which no sooner are they spread out than the time cometh for them to be rolled up. From these words of his, they who heard them perceived that these tents would never again be pitched on that spot. They had not yet been taken away when the messenger arrived from Baghdad to deliver the aforementioned communication from the governor. By the following day, the deputy governor had delivered Baha'u'llah in a mosque in the neighbourhood of the governor's house Ali Pasha's letter, addressed to the Namik Pasha, couched in courteous language, inviting Baha'u'llah to proceed as a guest of the Ottoman government to Constantinople, placing a sum of money at his disposal, and ordering a mounted escort to accompany him for his protection. To this request, Baha'u'llah gave his ready assent, but declined to accept the sum offered him. On the urgent representations of the deputy that such a refusal would offend the authorities, he reluctantly consented to receive the generous allowance set aside for his use and distributed it that same day among the poor. The effect upon the colony of exiles of this sudden intelligence was instantaneous and overwhelming. That day, wrote an eyewitness, describing the reaction of the community to the news of Baha'u'llah's approaching departure, witnessed a commotion associated with the turmoil of the day of resurrection. Methinks the very gates and walls of the city wept aloud at their imminent separation from the Abha beloved. The first night mention was made of his intended departure, his loved ones, one and all, renounced both food and sleep. Not a soul amongst them could be tranquilized. Many had resolved that in the event of their being deprived of the bounty of accompanying him, they would without hesitation kill themselves. Gradually, however, through the words which he addressed them, and through his exhortations and loving kindness, they were calmed and resigned themselves to his good pleasure. For every one of them, whether Arab or Persian, man or woman, child or adult, who lived in Baghdad, he revealed during those days, in his own hand, a separate tablet. In most of these tablets, he predicted the appearance of the calf and of the birds of the night, allusion to those who, as anticipated in the tablet of the Holy Mariner, are foreshadowed in the dream quoted above, were to raise the standard of rebellion and precipitate the gravest crisis in the history of the faith.
There's 7 years in which, after Baha'u'llah would return from Sulaymaniyah until the point where he declares, though this period was now coming to a close, unfortunately. So this complete transformation of the community had indeed taken place. Things were going to take a twist here. So Baha'u'llah, while he was there, he could have been there 7 years, he could have run away, he could have left. He had offers from the British, for example, from Campbell to go to India. He had many people trying to help him. We know we had Prince Dolgoruki, of course, who was trying to assist and help him to escape, but he decided no, he wasn't going to do that. He was going to stay there for a reason, and obviously the reason was to bring the revival of the Babi community, and then of course his declaration, which we know takes place whilst in that area. The kings of the earth are addressed by Baha'u'llah. When it's getting to his destination, we know the sultans and the ministers, they're all written whilst Baha'u'llah is essentially going to be moved to none other than Istanbul. This is what's going to take place. Sheikh Abdul Hussein and of course Mirza Bazar Khan, their 9 months of hard work to get Baha'u'llah moved eventually had come to fruition, unfortunately. And then we have Mirza Sayyid Khan, who tries to induce Abdul Aziz to get Baha'u'llah away from Baghdad. So these people are now working against Baha'u'llah, doing all they can, and Mirza Sayyid Khan describes Baha'u'llah as misguided and describes the Babi as a horrendous sect. Baha'u'llah is also horrendous, please, you have to move them on. And then the governor Mirza Hussein Khan as well is involved in getting Baha'u'llah sent to Istanbul. It was the 5th day of Nowruz in 1863 where the tablet of the Holy Mariner was then being revealed. A friend of Nimar Khan basically said that we want an interview with you and the governor. Things are going to be moving now. And Baha'u'llah says that he had a dream. And in this dream, he sees the prophets and the messengers coming to him, and they start crying, these prophets and the messengers. Baha'u'llah himself starts weeping hysterically. And Baha'u'llah says to him, why are you weeping? And they say, we weep for you. It's because of you that we're weeping. The concourse on high comes along and says, you're going to bear this pain, this suffering that no one in the future or in the past has ever borne. Baha'u'llah then has this tablet read, this tablet of the Holy Mariner, and he's staying in these tents, and he says, look, the trappings of the world are exactly the same as these tents. These tents are going to be rolled up, and things are just a temporary state, essentially. So the deputy governor then gives Baha'u'llah in a mosque the letter of Ali Pasha and says to him, look, you have to move to Istanbul, and here is some cash as well. And you can take this cash to be used for your expenses as you go. Baha'u'llah wants to refuse this, but seeing that this might be considered somewhat offensive, Baha'u'llah agrees to take the cash, but on the condition that he's going to be giving it to the poor along the way. The people who were in Baghdad were so sad that they say a commotion similar to the turmoil of the Day of Judgment. This is what they were feeling. They were absolutely besides themselves. Some of them even said, right, we're going to kill ourselves. That's it. We're going to end our lives. And Baha'u'llah obviously spoke to them and said, look, you need not do this. This is not the best thing to do. There's much more meritorious things for you to do. Share the message of the Bab, for example. Let's transform the world. Baha'u'llah then gives them all a tablet. He talks about the appearance of the calf and of the birds of night. And he says that, these are things that are in the Holy Mariner, and they foreshadowed in the dream, which will raise the standard of rebellion and to precipitate the gravest crisis in the history of the faith. So he's trying to get them to rise up and stand.
7 days after that mournful tablet had been so unexpectedly revealed by Baha'u'llah, and the fateful communication presaging his departure to Constantinople had been delivered into his hands on a Wednesday afternoon, April 22nd, 1863, 31 days after Nowruz, on the 3rd of Zulqa'dah, he set forth on the first stage of his 4 months journey to the capital of Ottoman Empire. That historic day, forever after designated as the first day of the Rizwan festival, the culmination of innumerable farewell visits, which friends and acquaintances of every class and denomination had been paying him, was one of the like of which the inhabitants of Baghdad had rarely beheld. A concourse of people of both sexes and of every age, comprising friends and strangers, Arabs, Kurds and Persians, notables and clerics, officials and merchants, as well as many of the lower classes, the poor, the orphan, the outcast, some surprised, others heartbroken, many tearful and apprehensive, a few impelled by Curiosity or secret satisfaction thronged the approaches of his house, eager to catch a final glimpse of one who for a decade had through precept and example exercised so potent an influence on so large a number of the heterogeneous inhabitants of their city. Living for the last time amidst weeping and lamentation, his most holy habitation, out of which had gone forth the breath of the all-glorious, and from which had poured forth in ceaseless strains the melody of the all-merciful, and dispensing on his way with a lavish hand a last alms to the poor he had so faithfully befriended, and uttering words of comfort to the disconsolate who besought him on every side, he at length reached the banks of the river and was ferried across, accompanied by his sons and amanuenses, to the Najibia garden, situated on the opposite shore. O my companions, he thus addressed the faithful band that surrounded him before he embarked. I entrust to your keeping the city of Baghdad in the state you now behold it, when from the eyes of friends and strangers alike, crowding its house steps, its streets and markets, tears like the rain of spring are flowing down, and I depart with you, it now rests, to watch lest your deeds and conduct dim the flame of love that gloweth within the breast of its inhabitants. The Muazzin had just raised the afternoon call to prayer when Baha'u'llah entered the Najibia garden, where he tarried 12 days before his final departure from the city. There his friends and companions, arriving in successive waves, attained his presence and bade him, with feelings of profound sorrow, their last farewell. Outstanding among them was the renowned Alusi, the Mufti of Baghdad, who with eyes dimmed with tears execrated the name of Nasir ad-Din Shah, whom he deemed to be primarily responsible for so unmerited a banishment. I have ceased to regard him, he openly asserted, as Nasir ad-Din Shah, the helper of the faith, but consider him rather to be its wrecker. Another distinguished visitor was the governor himself, Namik Pasha, who, after expressing in most respectful terms his regret at the developments which had precipitated Baha'u'llah's departure, and assuring him of his readiness to aid him in any way he could, handed to the officer appointed to accompany him a written order commanding the governors of the provinces through which the exiles were to be passing to extend to them the utmost consideration. Whatever you require, he, after profuse apologies, informed Baha'u'llah, you have but to command. We are ready to carry it out. Extend thy consideration to our beloved ones, was the reply to his insistent and reiterated offers, and deal with them with kindness, a request to which he gave his warm and unhesitating assent. Small wonder that in the face of so many evidences of deep-seated devotion, sympathy, and esteem, so strikingly manifested by high and low alike, from the time Baha'u'llah announced his contemplated journey to the day of his departure from Najibia garden, small wonder that those who had so tirelessly sought to secure the order for his banishment and had rejoiced at the success of their efforts should have now bitterly regretted their act. Such had been the interposition of God, Abdul Baha, in a letter written by him from that garden with reference to these enemies affirms that the joy evinced by them had been turned to chagrin and sorrow, so much so that the Persian consul general in Baghdad regrets exceedingly the plans and plots the schemers had devised. Namir Pasha himself, on the day he called on him, when Baha'u'llah stated, "Formerly they insisted upon your departure. Now, however, they're even more insistent that you should remain."
27 days after that previously mentioned tablets had been written, on April the 22nd, 1863, Baha'u'llah is going to start the first stage of his 4-month journey from Baghdad all the way up here to Constantinople, which is Istanbul, as it's called today. The poor came, the orphans, the friends, the outcasts, they had thronged to Baha'u'llah's house, and they were absolutely in love with him. They just wanted a final glimpse of the glory of God, absolutely clambering over each other. Can you imagine this as Baha'u'llah's going to be moved on? So many people were there. We know that Baha'u'llah gave money to the poor. Baha'u'llah tried helping people. A bunch of people followed them all the way to this river and the banks of the river, and eventually they go to the Najibieh garden. So he's going to be going there, and people keep following, and slowly the number starts peeling back. In this garden, there are people who are absolutely in love with him. It's clear and evident from the amount of people that came and the love that was there, that even Alusi, who was the Mufti of Baghdad, he was there. And he was someone who said, you know what, Nasruddin Shah, this helper of the people, the helper of the entire country, is now the wrecker of the country. This is what he's done. He's absolutely a wrecker, not Nasruddin Shah. I can't believe he's the one that's been behind a lot of these movements, absolutely distraught with what had gone on. Nimak Pasha, who was the governor, he has great regrets. And he says to Baha'u'llah, look, I'm so sorry with what's happened. And he says, I'm going to write to people and make sure they look after you on the way. But truly, we really love you. Even Mirza Bazar Khan, the person who was behind the Turk ruffian to try and kill Baha'u'llah, even him, after seeing the devotion, the consideration, he suddenly starts to realize that maybe what I've done is wrong. Abdul Baha comments, and he says that, the joy evinced by them had turned into chagrin and sorrow, these people that were trying to get rid of him, that even so much so that the Persian Consul General, so this is a reference to Mirza Bazar Khan, regrets exceedingly the plans and the plots that had been devised. Nimak Pasha as well also states, now that even those people that got rid of you wish you had stayed.
The declaration of Baha'u'llah's mission and his journey to Constantinople. The arrival of Baha'u'llah in the Najibieh garden, subsequently designated by his followers the Garden of Rizwan, signalizes the commencement of what has come to be recognized as the holiest and most significant of all Baha'i festivals. The festival commemorating the declaration of his mission to his companions. So momentous a declaration may well be regarded both as the logical consummation of that revolutionizing process, which was initiated by himself upon his return from Sulaymaniyeh, and as a prelude to the final proclamation of that same mission to the world and its rulers from Adrianople. Through that solemn act, the delay of no less than a decade, divinely interposed between the birth of Baha'u'llah's revelation in the Siyah-Chal and its announcement to the Bab's disciples, was at long last terminated. The set time of concealment, during which, as he himself has borne witness, the signs and tokens of a divinely appointed revelation were being showered upon him, was fulfilled. The myriad veils of light within which his glory had been wrapped were at that historic hour partially lifted, vouchsafing to mankind an infinitesimal glimmer of the effulgence of his peerless, his most sacred and exalted countenance. The 1,290 days fixed by Daniel in the last chapter of his book, as the duration of the abomination that maketh desolate had now elapsed. The 100 lunar years, destined to immediately precede that blissful consummation, 1,335 days, announced by Daniel in that same chapter, had commenced. The 19 years constituting the first Barhed, preordained in the Persian Bayan by the pen of the Bab, had been completed. The Lord of the kingdom, Jesus Christ, returned in the glory of the Father, was about to ascend his throne and assume the scepter of a world-embracing, indestructible sovereignty. The community of the Most Great Name, the companions of the crimson-colored ark, lauded in glowing terms in the Qayyum al-Asma, had visibly emerged. The Bab's own prophecy regarding the Rezban, the scene of the unveiling of Baha'u'llah's transcendent glory, had been literally fulfilled. Undaunted by the prospect of the appalling adversities, which, as predicted by himself, were soon to overtake him on the eve of the second banishment, which would be fraught with many hazards and perils, and would bring him still further from his native land, the cradle of his faith, to a country alien in race, in language, and in culture, acutely conscious of the extension of the circle of his adversaries, among whom were soon to be numbered a monarch more despotic than Nasir ad-Din Shah, and ministers no less unyielding in their hostility than either Haji Mirza Aghasi or the Amir Nizam. Undeterred by the perpetual interruptions occasioned by the influx of a host of visitors who thronged his tent, Baha'u'llah chose in that critical and seemingly unpropitious hour to advance so challenging a claim, to lay bare the mysteries surrounding his person, and to assume, in their plenitude, the power and the authority which were the exclusive privileges of the one whose advent the Bab had prophesied. Already the shadow of that great oncoming event had fallen upon the colony of exiles, who awaited expectantly its consummation. As the year 80 steadily and inexorably approached, he who had become the real leader of that community increasingly experienced and progressively communicated to his future followers the onrushing influences of its informing force. The festive, the soul-entrancing odes, which he revealed almost every day, the tablets replete with hints which streamed from his pen, the allusions which in private converse and public discourse he made to the approaching hour, the exaltation which in moments of joy and sadness alike flooded his soul, the ecstasy which filled his lovers, already enraptured by the multiplying evidences of his rising greatness and glory, the perceptible change noted in his demeanor, and finally, his adoption of the Taj, tall felt headdress, on the day of his departure from his most holy house, all proclaimed unmistakably his imminent assumption of the prophetic office and of his open leadership of the community of the Bab's followers. Many a night, writes Nabil, depicting the tumult that had seized the hearts of Baha'u'llah's companions in the days prior to the declaration of his mission, would Mirza Agha Jan gather them together in his room, close the door, light numerous camphorated candles, and chant aloud to them the newly revealed odes and tablets in his possession. Wholly oblivious of this contingent world, completely immersed in the realms of the spirit, forgetful of the necessity for food, sleep, or drink, they would suddenly discover that night had become day and that the sun was approaching its zenith. Of the exact circumstances attending that epoch-making declaration, we, alas, are but scantily informed. The words Baha'u'llah actually uttered on that occasion, the manner of his declaration, the reaction it produced, its impact on Mirza Yahya, the identity of those who were privileged to hear him, are shrouded in an obscurity which future historians will find it difficult to penetrate. The fragmentary description left by posterity by his chronicler Nabil is one of the very few authentic records we possess of the memorable days he spent in that garden. Every day, Nabil has related, ere the hour of dawn, the gardeners would pick the roses which line the 4 avenues of the garden and would pile them in the center of the floor of his blessed tent. So great would be the heap that when his companions gathered to drink their morning tea in his presence, they would be unable to see each other across it. All these roses Baha'u'llah would, with his own hands, entrust to those whom he dismissed from his presence every morning to be delivered on his behalf to his Arab and Persian friends in the city. One night, he continues, the 9th night of the waxing moon, I happened to be one of those who watched beside his blessed tent. As the hour of midnight approached, I saw him issue from his tent, pass by the places where some of his companions were sleeping, and begin to pace up and down the moonlit, flower-bordered avenues of the garden. So loud was the singing of the nightingales on every side that only those who were near him could hear distinctly his voice. He continued to walk until, pausing in the midst of one of these avenues, he observed, "Consider these nightingales. So great is their love for these roses that sleepless from dusk till dawn, they warble their melodies and commune with burning passion with the object of their adoration. How then can those who claim to be afire with the rose-like beauty of the beloved choose to sleep? For 3 successive nights I watched and circled round his blessed tent. Every time I passed by the couch whereon he lay, I would find him wakeful, and every day, from morn till eventide, I would see him ceaselessly engaged in conversing with the stream of visitors who kept flowing in from Baghdad. Not once could I discover in the words he spoke any trace of dissimulation." As to the significance of that declaration, let Baha'u'llah himself reveal to us its import. Acclaiming that historic occasion as the most great festival, the king of festivals, the festival of God, he has in his Kitab Aqdas characterized it as the day whereon all created things were immersed in the sea of purification. Whilst in one of his specific tablets, he has referred to it as the day whereon the breezes of forgiveness were wafted over the entire creation. Rejoice with exceeding gladness, O people of Baha. He in another tablet has written, as ye call to remembrance the day of supreme felicity, the day whereon the tongue of the Ancient of Days had spoken, as he departed from his house, proceeding to the spot from which he shed upon the whole of creation the splendors of his name, the All-Merciful. Were we to reveal the hidden secrets of that day, all that dwell on earth and in the heavens would swoon away and die, except such as will be preserved by God, the Almighty, the All-Knowing, the All-Wise. Such is the inebriating effect of the words of God upon the revealer of his undoubted proofs, that his pen can move no longer. And again, the divine springtime is come, O most exalted pen, for the festival of the All-Merciful is fast approaching. The day star of blissfulness shineth above the horizon of our name, the blissful, inasmuch as the kingdom of the name of God hath been adorned with the ornament of the name of thy Lord, the creator of the heavens. Take heed lest anything deter thee from extolling the greatness of this day, the day whereon the finger of majesty and power hath opened the seal of the wine of reunion, and called all who are in the heavens and all who are on earth. This is the day whereon the unseen world crieth out, Great is thy blessedness, O earth, for thou hast been made the footstool of thy God, and been chosen as the seat of his mighty throne. Say, he it is who hath laid bare before you the hidden and treasured gem, were ye to seek it. He it is who is the one beloved of all things, whether of the past or of the future. And yet again, arise and proclaim unto the entire creation the tidings that he who is the all-merciful hath directed his steps towards the Resvan and entered it. Guide then the people unto the garden of delight, which God hath made the throne of his paradise. Within this paradise, and from the heights of its loftiest chambers, the maids of heaven have cried out and shouted, Rejoice, ye dwellers of the realms above, for the fingers of him who is the Ancient of Days are ringing, in the name of the All-Glorious, the most great bell in the midmost heart of the heavens. The hands of bounty have borne round the cups of everlasting life. Approach and quaff your fill. And finally, forget the world of creation, O pen, and turn thou towards the face of thy Lord, the Lord of all names. Adorn then the world with the ornament of the favors of thy Lord, the King of everlasting days. For we perceive the fragrance of the day whereon he who is the desire of all nations hath shed upon the kingdoms of the unseen and of the seen the splendors of the light of his most excellent names, and envelop them with the radiance of the luminaries of his most gracious favors, favors which none can reckon except him who is the omnipotent protector of the entire creation.
Najib Yegan, this is what we refer to as none other than the Garden of Resvan. This is the Resvan Garden, where the joy is going to take place, where Baha'u'llah will obviously be revealing exactly the station that he is him whom God shall make manifest. So Baha'u'llah was such a powerful entity. He was revealing every day different tablets and different words, and people were absolutely blown away by everything he was doing. Of course they were. He was him whom God shall make manifest. Many a night, Mirza Agha Jan, this is before they had left, he would take some of the writings that were revealed by Baha'u'llah and would share them with the Babis, and the Babis were blown away. So they'd be going so much so that even until the morning had come up, they'd be there. And it says that the night would turn into day, and this is how in love people were with these writings that were being revealed. Nabil recounts that the gardeners in this garden would go and they'd go up these 4 avenues and they'd pick all these flowers, and they'd bring these flowers and they'd put them in the center of Baha'u'llah's tent. Baha'u'llah would then take these roses and he would give them to people that were heading back to towns, and he would hand them out to people and would speak to vast and many people. On the 9th day, around about midnight, it said that this is when Baha'u'llah was witnessed, and he was walking up and down, and you could hear the hummingbirds and all the birds around him basically tweeting away and absolutely being in love. And Baha'u'llah says, look, these birds are in love with the roses. How is it possible that they could sleep in love with the roses? Now, even different, so with this first story is where Baha'u'llah's walking along with the nightingales singing, but how would this be possible that they would be able to do this? How would the lovers of God be able to not be in love with God? How could they sleep? Just like the birds can't sleep for the roses. The other story is that during the day, Baha'u'llah would obviously, he would meet with visitors, and all these visitors would be so in love with him. Then we obviously hear the account of Baha'u'llah himself talking about this day, which is near impossible to recap. It's something that maybe we could ourselves reread again or whatever and see the beauty of what's taking place on this day.
I would like to know who is the Ancient of Days.
The Ancient of Days referring to Baha'u'llah.
There's a reference in this passage that the Bab had prophesied Rizwan. I wonder if anybody has knowledge of that quotation from the Bab's own prophecy, that one.
The guardian of the faith, the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, at the same time as he revealed God passes by, he revealed a very major communication in Persian and Arabic, which is called Lawh-e-Qarn, the tablet of the centennial celebration. So this Lawh-e-Qarn, as it were, is like a sister volume to God passes by, but it's the most incredible penmanship by the beloved guardian, everlasting, I think. In that Persian Arabic tablet of the guardian, the beloved Shoghi Effendi quotes the Bab, and the sentence is in Arabic. The Bab wrote a prayer that the beloved guardian quotes, and the prayer goes, Antamunna alayya biliqa'ika fir Ridwan. I beg of you, O God, to allow me to enter your presence in the Rizwan and to inhale your fragrance fi arz salam. And I wish to inhale, I beg you to allow me to inhale your divine fragrances in the abode of peace, which is another name for Baghdad in Babi Baha'i literature and Quran as well. It's mentioned 3 times. So it's interesting that the beloved guardian saw that in the writings of His Holiness the Bab, that it was a prayer of the Bab that, please God, allow me, tamunna yani minnat bezar, give me this bounty, it moves me, to attain your presence, God, in the Rizwan, and which is in the abode of peace. So the Bab really most accurately predicted Baha'u'llah disclosing his beauty, unveiling his beauty, revealing the divine beauty.
What is the inner meaning of Ridwan?
Ridwan is a Quranic term. It's in the Quran. Ridwan means God's good pleasure. From the word Reza, Dave often mentions Imam Reza in Mashhad. So it's the same root, Reza. So
what I want to know is what is the meaning for you, Baha'i, of the Baha'i faith? Because Ridwan is also a part, it's also a room near the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes, absolutely. So Rizwan then, having appeared in the Holy Quran, having got a history, some of the Islamic scholars have said Rizwan is the name of the guard or the room where the guard is to allow you to enter the paradise, the Firdaus, the Jannat. There are so many beautiful names for the world that we hope to go to. So Ridwan, in a sense, is also the name of the guard, but then it's made into like a summary, like an ellipsis, that we are not talking about the guard of the Rizwan, but we are also talking about the garden. So it's called Bagh-e Rizwan, or the Garden of Rizwan, and the festival is called the Festival of Rizwan. The name of the garden originally was after Najib Pasha, one of the governors of Mesopotamia, appointed by the Ottoman Empire, Najib Pasha. So it became Najibiyye, but Baha'u'llah gave it its name of Rizwan, Bagh-e Rizwan, Jannat al-Rizwan, Hadiqat al-Rizwan. And so there is a great man that the great Dave mentioned called Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi was living in the 8th or 7th century and is the greatest theosophist, as you know, dearest Patrick. He also has got a lot of references to Rizwan. And he says, playing with the word Rizwan in one of his poems, the Baha'is have concluded that the date is 1290. which is the date of the declaration of Baha'u'llah, exactly 1,290 years, as in Daniel's prophecy, after the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, he was given the mission in the Mount of Hira. So 1280 AH equals 1290 Ba'ad al-Ba'sat, after the Ba'sat, after his assumption of a prophetic career. So it's very beautiful. The whole thing is, and I'm just thinking, 1863 was also the start of the American Civil War, which resulted in emancipation. So on the one hand, that incredible war, apparently it was the war with the greatest number of casualties, to establish one principle, and then Baha'u'llah was establishing the principle that all humanity can enter the sea of purification and so on. So it is incredible, 1860s. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Dear Khaza, if you're there as well, another question just to clarify. When was the declaration of Baha'u'llah? Was it on the first day, the 9th day, or which day of Rizwan was this?
My limited understanding, dearest Dave, is that His Holiness Baha'u'llah progressively unfolded his station. So on the first day, the family moved to this garden of Najibiyya, in brackets Rizwan. So the family, Hazrat Abdul Baha, Hazrat Baraqi Awliya, all the family and the immediate people. So he told them that, you know, I have been supporting the cause of the Bab, and I am the one that the Bab loved. And anyway, it's just incredible. So the family were already convinced. And so as the days went by, more and more visitors would come, and they would see him sometimes seated, sometimes serving. And as the beloved guardian says, with his new hat, which is kept in the mansion of Bahji, that's called the Taj. That's the one that Professor Edward Brown described, that beautiful Taj that he had. So he assumed that from now on, I'm going to redeem not only the Baha'i community, but the whole humanity, not just for 1,000 years, but for 5,000 centuries. So it was gradual, dearest Dave, progressive. You know, it wasn't like, because the Bab specifies in the Persian Bayan that the moment he spoke to Mullah Hussein, the clock was 2 hours and 11 minutes after sunset. But for Baha'u'llah, the first day was a disclosure. The 9th day, 9 is a very, very precious number. And the 12th, which was, of course, its last day before their departure. Thank you very much. Forgive my tears. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Khaza. I'm always so attached to the material and so in love with it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 7:32. I'm aware that time is ticking on. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this particular session. And we will go and share some prayers. Thank you so much. As you know, Dawnbreakers will be continuing tomorrow, and then God Passes By shall return after that. O God, my beloved, my heart's desire.